More money making. Today I want to talk about one of the simplest investment portfolios available, which is to invest in two funds. One for global equities and one for either domestic or global bonds. So let's go over your options for these funds, as well as some of the pros and cons of this strategy. For a discussion of an even simpler portfolio consisting of a single fund called a multi-asset fund, see my previous video. As always, if you like what you're watching, please destroy the like and subscribe buttons and notification bell for the YouTube algorithm. Equities and bonds in varying proportions are the core holdings of virtually every retail investment portfolio. A two-fund portfolio can give you exposure to equities and bonds all over the world and allow you to customize the proportions of each at any time. As mentioned in the previous video, how much you wish to hold in equities and bonds will come down to the returns you want to achieve, over what period, and your risk tolerance. Also, as mentioned in the previous video, with a two-fund portfolio, you will need to rebalance periodically to ensure you keep to your desired proportions. Now let's take a look at a selection of the possible funds you can use within your two-fund portfolio, starting with the Global Equity Fund. Here, we're looking for funds that track the whole world, including emerging markets, so it's important to look for something that tracks all world, or global, rather than just world, which is normally just developed markets. We want plenty of diversification, so thousands of holdings, and we're looking for low cost to not dilute your returns too much. Also, check where the fund is based. In the UK, your investments are covered up to £85,000, whereas in Ireland, you're only covered up to €20,000. This is just in the unlikely event of something like widespread fraud on your chosen platform. So let's compare HSBC FTSE All World Index, iShares MSCI ACWI ETF, and Vanguard FTSE Global All Cap Index Fund. HSBC is the cheapest with an ongoing fund charge, or OCF, of 0.13%, compared with iShares at 0.2% and Vanguard at 0.22%. HSBC tracks the FTSE All World Index, iShares tracks the MSCI All Country World Index, and Vanguard tracks the FTSE Global All Cap Index, so all three are truly global funds. Vanguard has 11% in emerging markets, HSBC has 10%, and iShares has just 5%. In truth, it's hard to know whether more or less in emerging markets will work out better in the future, but it's a good thing that all three include some. Vanguard has 6,858 holdings, HSBC has 3,100, and iShares has 1,598, so Vanguard has better diversification and also includes around 5% small caps or companies. Vanguard and HSBC are based in the UK, whereas iShares is based in Ireland, so iShares offers less investor compensation, but you shouldn't need it, particularly if you stick to the major mainstream platforms. Overall then, there's very little between these three funds. For increased diversification, I'd probably plump for Vanguard, or if you want the absolute cheapest, then HSBC. Now let's talk about bonds. As discussed previously, for our purposes, we're looking for bonds to be a refuge in a crisis and not to add diversification and risk to your portfolio, as you have plenty of that already from equities. The bonds that best serve this purpose are UK government bonds or highly rated foreign government bonds that are hedged back to the pound. For an explanation of why this is the case, see the previous video. When it comes to UK government bonds, there are various options that are essentially all very similar in terms of cost, index tracked, duration, and yield to maturity, which is all discussed in my video on the main investment asset classes. Examples of funds include Vanguard UK Government Bond Index Fund, iShares UK Gilts All Stocks Index Fund, and Invesco UK Gilts ETF. It's worth noting where the fund is based for the same reasons as for our equities fund. These three are all based in Ireland. When it comes to global government bonds, there appears to be only one option in this space, and that is iShares Global Government Bond ETF. There are other global bond funds, but they all contain some corporate and other types of bonds, which, as mentioned previously, all add extra diversification and risk to your portfolio. Examples of these funds include Vanguard Global Bond Index Fund and SPDR Bloomberg Barclays Global Aggregate Bond ETF. The iShares fund has slightly higher costs, 0.25% versus 0.15% and 0.1% respectively, and slightly poorer recent returns, but this is to be expected because government bonds are a refuge in a crisis. If you prefer to trade off some crash protection for a little extra yield, then products holding corporate and other bonds can make sense. So, given the diversification benefits of global government bonds, why would you go for a 100% UK government bond or gilts tracker? Mainly because the gilt trackers are 1/3 less costly to own, offer more yield, and promise marginally more crash protection. So, what are the pros and cons of a two-fund portfolio compared to multi-asset funds? Well, your underlying charges will typically be lower on average with a two-fund portfolio. You can also choose your precise desired proportions of equities and bonds, rather than be limited by the choice offered by multi-asset funds, particularly funds where the asset allocation isn't fixed and can change at the whim of the fund manager. A downside versus multi-asset funds is that you may need to spend time and perhaps money, depending on platform dealing costs, to rebalance periodically. But how often should you rebalance, and what should your threshold be for doing so? It's basically a trade-off between accurately sticking to your portfolio allocations versus the time and cost of rebalancing. According to a Vanguard study, for most investors running a simple bonds and shares portfolio, reviewing just once or twice a year and rebalancing at 5% thresholds should be enough. I certainly wouldn't recommend doing so any more than quarterly. You can potentially avoid this extra cost altogether if you're regularly adding to your investments from your salary, for example, by simply buying more of whichever fund has performed worse out of equities and bonds. For example, let's assume you start out with a portfolio consisting of 80% equities and 20% bonds. But at the end of year one, the valuations have changed such that you now hold 90% equities. If you're adding to your investments, you may be able to rebalance by simply buying more bonds with this money than equities. Conversely, in retirement, you may be able to rebalance by selling more of one asset than the other. In the next video, we'll discuss various different investment portfolios, which may offer better returns at the cost of increased complexity. However, for most investors, a single multi-asset fund or a two-fund portfolio will enable them to achieve their investment goals. The most important components of an investment portfolio are equities and bonds and their proportions based on your risk tolerance. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please add your own thoughts and follow-up questions in the comments, and I'll try to get through as many as I can. If you made it to the very end, please destroy the like and subscribe buttons and notification bell so you never miss a chance for more money making.